Hello, everyone, and welcome to FCC's virtual event, The Negotiation Mindset. I'm your host, Caitlin Dubin, and I am so excited to be here with you today. I myself am a grain farmer from Southern Alberta. I'm a storyteller and a community builder. I have had the absolute privilege of celebrating the stories of women in agriculture through my podcast, the Rural Woman Podcast, since 2019. Due to the popularity of FCC's most recent Women's series, they've decided to extend the series, and today we will be showcasing the second episode of the year. I would like to thank you all for joining us here today. We are going to spend the next hour together learning from a communication expert, Lauren Sergy. Lauren, she will be leading us through concepts and strategies that will help you negotiate with integrity and openness. While today's session is being delivered virtually, wherever we find ourselves in Canada, we are on traditional Indigenous territories with rich traditions, stories, and histories that we have an opportunity to be curious about and honor. I want to acknowledge that I am coming to you today from my farm in Southern Alberta on Treaty 7 territory. This recognition is more than an acknowledgement of territory. This is about recognizing Indigenous people across Canada as the original caretakers of the land we work, live, honor, and play on, and to respect the diversity and strength of all Indigenous people. May we continue to learn and unlearn. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, Lauren Sergy, there is a little housekeeping. This session will be recorded and a link will be sent out to everyone who registered. So if you have to sneak away or want to share this with a family member, that will be available to you in a few days. A recording of the event will be sent out to all of you, as well as all of the links that are mentioned in the show. If you have any technical questions, there is a blue support button on the lower part of your screen. Just click there and somebody will be able to help you out. As you may have noticed, there is a chat on the right-hand side of the screen. Drop a hello in there and let us know where you're dialing in from today. And besides the chat, there is a Q&A box, so feel free to ask as many questions as you have in there, and we will get to as many of them as time will allow after the end of the session. The Q&A is moderated, and your questions can be anonymous. There is also going to be polling questions, which will be posted throughout the presentation, and you can find that beside the Q&A box. Please take a moment to check all of the boxes and make sure that you answer the Q&A questions when they become available, or the polling questions, I should say. Now, let me introduce our keynote speaker, Lauren Sergy. This is Lauren's second time presenting with us at FCC, and we are so excited to have her back. Lauren is a communication expert that has helped thousands of people become more effective leaders through skilled communication. She's worked with audiences and organizations in Canada, the US, the UK, and Europe. Please help me welcome Lauren Sergy to the stage.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be back.
Hi, friend. We're so excited. Take it away.
So, the Harvard Business Negotiation Project defines negotiations as a back and forth conversation between two parties designed to get an agreement where some interests are shared and some are opposed. And I am so sorry for kicking things off that way, but we got to get a definition on the table. And given that definition of negotiations, could you type into the chat box the number of negotiations that you have participated in so far today? Just take your best guess. There we go. And Caitlin, if you could shout out a few of those numbers as they come in. Oh, you're on mute.
Here we go.
There we go.
Let's get these numbers coming. Hello. 5, 15, 100.
Good God, what are you up to?
2. I think that one had to do with kids.
It's possible. You must be exhausted. Ms. 15 negotiations so far. Grab yourself a glass of wine, take a break. You're off for the rest of the day. But we're seeing a pretty wide range, right? Like 2, 5, 15, 20.
Yeah, anywhere between, the teens to 4 to 50 to many, all of the above.
That is really good to acknowledge, actually. I myself have had 2 today so far. The first one was an email response to a client, so the back and forth is entirely through email. The other one was with my son, of course, regarding the Alberta teachers' strike and his screen time versus homework allotment. Ain't it gonna be fun, folks? Buckle up. But as you can see, negotiations, we do it regularly throughout the day because it is a normal human communication activity. It's just something that we do on a regular basis. Some are small, some are big, some are quick, some are long. But regardless, it's really important to be able to tap into a strong, clear-headed mindset when you're approaching negotiations. And we do that by having strategies and practicing these strategies that will help us reach good agreements. So it is a learned skill, but it is a skill that I believe that everyone can learn. Now, we're going to be covering a fair number of strategies today, but I am determined to save both your hands and your brain. So I have developed handouts for you, and I will tell you at the end of our session how you can get a hold of them. Now, ideally, negotiating is a collaborative process. It is an engagement of problem solving where you're working with another person to figure out a solution to a problem that the two of you share. In its best form, it can be quite enjoyable. It can actually help to build and improve relationships. And this is as much a mindset as it is a strategy. The type of people who have this mindset, we call collaborative type negotiators, because ultimately communication professionals aren't that creative with their titles. But they're collaborative types because that is how they see negotiations. They see it as an opportunity that they want to explore, a problem, a puzzle that they're going to solve with another person. It's a very positive outlook. Now, I will be honest with you. There are very few naturally occurring collaborative type negotiators. For the most part, people who become collaborative are that way because it is a skill that they learned and they refined and they practiced. This isn't because people aren't good at collaborating. It's because negotiation itself inherently involves disagreement and conflict. If you didn't disagree, if there was no conflict, you would already be in agreement. Because of the nature of negotiation as having conflict, people typically see it less like this. I'll point to the right side of the screen. And more often, the image that we get in our head is this, right? Very, very different. We think of negotiations as things, especially the big high stakes negotiations, where we have to lock horns with the other person, we have to dig in, and often it's a matter of outwitting, outmaneuvering, or just outstubborning the other party until someone gives in. Now, for some people, this image is great. They love it. The competitive side gets fired up. They are ready to get in there. They are ready to win, right? That is often the focus that they have. And very often they seek to get agreement by domineering the other person. This sort of negotiator we refer to as the adversarial type. And sometimes they sound stereotypically aggressive. Sometimes they're very nice, but there's just no way to shift them on the position that they've taken. That is all an adversarial approach. Their mindset towards negotiation is that this is a fight I need to win. Now, the flip side of that are the people who see this image here and they do not want to lock horns. They want none of this. They dislike conflict. They would rather stay away from it. And so, in an effort to come to an agreement that's friendly and hopefully quick, they give in much more than they should. They'll leave a good deal on the table. They will give too much away from what they have to offer. These types we refer to as the accommodating types. So you've got the collaborative, the adversarial, and the accommodating types. They see this and they think this is a conflict I want to avoid. All of us have our own default type, the kind of negotiator that we are when we're not thinking about it, or when we're not prepared, or when we're under a lot of stress and pressure in the process itself. And it's good to know what your default type is, because that will help you choose how you're going to use the strategies to overcome any weaknesses in your negotiation style. And here's where we're going to get to our first poll. I am curious, what kind of default type negotiator are you? What's your mindset? Are you a collaborative, an adversarial, or the accommodating type? Go ahead and run that poll. We'll give you a few seconds to respond. And for full disclosure, by the way, I am an accommodating type as default. I have learned how to become collaborative, but if I'm really stressed, if I'm not paying attention, I'm a people pleaser. So Caitlin, do we have some responses on that poll yet?
We do. And right now it's neck and neck between collaborative and accommodating, with a couple adversarials peeking in here.
And you are, by the way, if you're an adversarial type, you are not an inherently bad person. You're probably just naturally competitive, and that's what negotiation brings up for you. Now, those are really interesting results, actually, the even division between collaborative and accommodating. And it wouldn't surprise me if many people here, given the nature of the agricultural sector, it's competitive, it's saturated in testosterone, it can be really high stakes, that many of you have had to learn to become collaborative type negotiators to be able to make headway in your work and in your career. Now, today, our view is to, if you are a collaborative type, is to strengthen those collaborative strategies. And if you're an accommodating or adversarial type, to help you move towards a collaborative type without undergoing a personality shift, because you don't need to get a personality transplant to be a collaborative negotiator. Now, there are, of course, loads and loads and loads of strategies available, but we are going to home in on the three that I find give you the biggest bang for your buck. These are three key behaviors that really amplify that solid collaborative mindset. Key behavior number one is that negotiators with a strong mindset focus on interests, not positions. Key two is that they understand their assets. They thoroughly know what cards they have to bring to the table. And the third is that they have strong boundaries and strong BATNAs. And don't worry if you don't know what a BATNA is. We're going to get to that in the third part of this keynote here. Now, learning is always better by doing. So what I want everyone here to do is pull out a piece of paper, open up a Word doc, what have you, and write at the top, negotiation. Then I want you to brainstorm a negotiation that you have coming up. It could be big, could be small. Just write down what it is in 3 to 4 words real quick. I'll give you 15 seconds to think of that. Okay. Now, can anyone share what they wrote down in the chat box? Is anyone willing to share what their negotiation is? Again, just 3, maybe 4 words. Let's hear what's going on. Maybe you need to negotiate over what you're bringing to Thanksgiving, or you're working on a land agreement or something like that. What have you got? Caitlin, do we have anything popping up in chat? It might take a second.
They're thinking really hard still.
Well, I can tell you right now, something that I have is an additional services contract where someone they're bringing me in to do a workshop, but they want me to add on a bunch of services. And if I'm to be honest, they're trying to get them for free. That's not going to happen. We need to find an area where they are okay and I am okay with all of this. So whatever
Absolutely.
you've had, yeah, exactly. And that's the give and take of negotiation. Whatever you have written at the top of your piece of paper, I want you to keep that handy because we're going to come back to it. Now, within what we're working on, with interests, not positions, being the first key that we're going to look at, this is a really critical concept within negotiation, the difference between interests and positions. Oh, we've got land leases and vehicle agreements. Excellent. Keep popping them up in chat. I love seeing what's going on. Now, the difference between interest and position is crucial because it's going to direct the focus of your negotiation. All negotiations come with people having certain demands, certain stances, asks, things that they want the other party to agree to. So it could be that they want you to agree to a 2-year service contract instead of 5, or they need certain exclusions. You need certain exclusions on a land lease, or you want to bring a ham instead of a turkey for Thanksgiving, which is sacrosanct, I know, but variety is the spice of life. Whatever that concrete demand or stance is, that's what's known as your position, and they are the what of a negotiation. Positions are the tip of the negotiation iceberg, but they are also the piece that we see first, because it's usually the thing that we're walking in with. Now, just as with icebergs, there is a whole lot more going on under the surface, and under the surface of our positions exist our interests. The interests are the why to the what. So those are all of the needs and the motivations that caused you to come to the position that you have, that caused you to make that demand or take that stance. Now, when you start pulling apart a position, you'll see that there's way more interests at play. There are often many reasons why we want what we want, but the problem we run into is that in negotiations, we tend to focus on positions. And when we do that, the reaction people have is to stick their stake in the ground and then defend that position. That's where we start locking horns, because that's the thing we want, right? That's the thing we have to get. If, on the other hand, we take a step back and we say, okay, you know what? We've stated our positions, but let's look deeper than that. Let's start asking why. What you'll find is that you start to look at a much bigger picture, and that helps calm our brains down. It puts us into a space that is calmer, that is more perceptive, that is much more self-controlled. And as you begin to look at both your interests and those of the person that you're negotiating with, you start to see things, needs, that might be similar, that might be complementary or dovetail. So by meeting need A for you, you're meeting need X for them. And it shows you that there are often a lot of opportunities within the negotiation, not to give in to someone's position, but to work together to create a new solution, to create alternatives. That puts you in a more collaborative state of mind, because now you're working together, knowing what it is that knowing what it is that each of you actually want. And I'll give you a demonstration of what this looks like in real life with a very silly personal example, because I love my silly examples. And it involves the local distribution of cruciferous vegetables, namely my attempts to get this boyo to actually eat his flipping broccoli. So this is my son, Nico, now 13 years old. At the time of this story, he was 5, and we were having it out over the vegetable battle that I'm sure most parents and probably most adults on this call can recognize from a mile away. So we needed to stop focusing on the positions, because that we'd just be locking horns, and look at our interests. Now, doing this all starts with acknowledging what people's positions are. And ours were fairly straightforward. My position was the classic parental eat your broccoli or there is no dessert. And his position was even clearer. No, right? Intractable. We're not going to get anywhere on this. So let's dig into interests. My interests were predominantly around nutrition, right? I don't want my cat getting rickets or something like that because they didn't eat a wide enough variety. And I also wanted to expand the palate so that we could eat something more than cucumbers and noodles every single night. But if I'm to be honest, remember, we're looking for all needs and motivations. I wanted to win the fight. He had out-negotiated me a few times earlier that week, and I was hurting from that, because I also, frankly, wanted to retain some shreds of personal dignity while we were at it. Now, Nico's interests were fewer, but they were as strong. First up, he didn't want to eat the broccoli. He didn't like it very much. But also, he really wanted to win one over on me, because nothing was more fun than winning an argument against Mom, who argues for a living, quite frankly. He loved it, especially if I could be a little bit embarrassed whenever he won whatever it was he was arguing with me about. So now that we have our interests, we can start prioritizing them and looking for places where they might match up or at least complement one another. My priorities, honestly, it was not winning the battle or even retaining dignity, because I sacrificed all my dignity when I brought him home from the hospital. My priorities were the nutrition and the expanded palate. His priority was very much winning that argument. He was willing to choke down a couple of florets if I would agree to something to which he felt like he had the upper hand. So looking at this, the two of us were able to come up with a new solution, with a new position that worked for both of us, which was that he would sit on my lap while I shoveled broccoli into his mouth like a baby, because for whatever reason, he thought this was hilarious and more than abundantly embarrassing to yours truly to be worth his while. So looking at interests, we were able to come up with a new position. Now, you might be rolling your eyes and thinking, Lauren, do not compare the vegetable battle with something more serious, like a service contract, like a land purchase, like a will negotiation. Don't compare that. They are not the same thing. We are not dealing with the same stakes here. And you're absolutely correct. The stakes are different, but the process of focusing on interests in order to shift the tone and the focus of the negotiation, that principle and practice is the same. And one of the best, classic storied examples of this out there are the Camp David Accords regarding the occupation of the Sinai region in the late 1970s. We're busting out the big stuff here. Now, to vastly oversimplify complicated geopolitical squabbles, in the late 1970s, Israel had occupied a portion of the Sinai region, and it looked like Israel and Egypt were heading very rapidly towards war. Now, they wanted to avoid this, so the two countries went to Camp David in the US, along with a whole pile of third-party outside source negotiators to try to work out a deal. Now, at first, the negotiations revolved around positions, and the positions were focused on borders. Who would get what land? Where are we drawing up these borders? And of course, because usually redrawing borders never makes anyone happy, they couldn't land on anything that was acceptable to both parties. Their positions were intractable. So the negotiators shifted the focus of the conversation over towards the interests. Why does each party want what they want? Well, in Egypt's case, the Sinai region was ancestral territory for them. It had been theirs since the time of the pharaohs, but over the past 100 or so years in particular, it had been subject to a number of foreign occupations by one country or another, and they were tired of it. They wanted their sovereignty back. Israel, on the other hand, was really concerned about increased military aggression coming from Egypt. They were a bit worried that there might be an incursion brewing or something like that. So they moved in and set up that occupation to create a buffer zone in between Egyptian territory and Israeli territory. So again, to vastly oversimplify this, Egypt's main interest was sovereignty. Israel's main interest was security. Could they find an agreement that would fit those interests instead of looking at the positions, which was the borders? And the agreement that they came up with was that Egypt would retain and reclaim basically political control over the entire region. All of the Sinai would return to them. However, there would be a demilitarized zone set up in between Egypt and Israel along that Sinai region border. So Egypt would get their sovereignty back. Israel, however, would also get their security due to that demilitarized zone. No tanks could come near them. That was how interest-focused negotiation shifted the conversation. When you start looking at those whys behind the whats, it makes things less tense, it changes the focus, and it opens us up to explore options and possibilities. It is the most powerful mindset shift you can do in a negotiation, which is why it is key number one. So knowing that, I would like you to pull up your piece of paper once again, and underneath underneath negotiation, I want you to type position or ask. Remember, this is the thing you want the other person to agree to. I will give you 10 seconds to write something down. Given your negotiation, what is the thing you want them to agree to? 4 more seconds. Okay, now under that, you're going to write interests. And I put in mine because I don't want you to worry about the other party's interests right now. Just think of yours. Ask yourself, why do I want this thing? And then ask why again. Why do I feel the way that I feel about ham instead of turkey? Why are those exclusions on the land lease important? Why is the 2-year contract going to impact my business many more years down the road to make it more attractive? Why? 10 more seconds to brainstorm as many as you can. Okay, now we're going to run a poll because I am nosy and I am curious, how many interests were you able to come up with? Don't feel ashamed. It's not a contest. Do not be embarrassed if you weren't able to come up with many, if any at all. This is sometimes a really hard question to answer. What are our results there, Caitlin?
Currently, we have 100% of the answers, 1 to 2. So like you said, not having to come up with a lot. Now we get the 3 to 5.
I've only given you, 15 seconds to do this?
They're quick.
Yep. Are there still some responses coming in? Okay.
Yeah, most of them are 1 to 2, and then it's going 3 to 5.
Okay, great.
70% are 1 to 2.
Yeah. Now, with figuring out your interests, sometimes it's going to be really easy. You will know them right off the bat. Other times, we get hyperfixated on those positions and we don't realize just how many interests were informing that, all of the reasons why we came to that position. When you're doing this activity, it's really important to do it for yourself, but to also do it for the other party or with the other party. If you can do it with them, if you can have that conversation with the other party and help them figure out why, that is ideal. But if you can't, if you need to do some crystal ball gazing and figure out what's in their head, then step into their shoes, look at this negotiation from their perspective without judgment, and then ask why and why again, and explore it all the way down. If you do that in good faith, you will likely be able to come up with a fairly plausible list of interests on behalf of the other party. And then you can anticipate some areas of collaboration before the negotiation even happens. It is a worthwhile exercise, and it's best when done in advance. Now, let us look at key number 2. Which is that in order to have a really good negotiation mindset, you need to have a thorough understanding of your assets. An asset is anything that you have that the other party wants, needs, values, or is interested in. Absolutely anything. Now, often we go into negotiations, particularly ones that we're planning for, knowing a few of our assets, having a handful of them. But so often I find that this is something that people do on the back of a napkin when they're getting coffee right before going into that meeting where they're going to engage in the back and forth. It's something that we think on a superficial level, but don't dig into enough and don't spend enough time objectively evaluating. So doing that leaves us vulnerable to 2 problems in particular. The first problem is that we might overlook or undervalue the assets that we have. Think again to Thanksgiving dinner, because that is coming right up and I am clearly very hungry and food motivated. Let's say that you are participating in a Thanksgiving potluck and you're trying to figure out with other people who is going to bring what. There's some back and forth and banter going on here. Now, you think that for others to feel that you're making a good contribution, that you are actually pulling your weight, that you need to bring some kind of big ticket item, right? You got to bring the bird, or you need to bring a side of prime rib or some really fancy dessert that's going to take you at least 2 days in advance to make, because of course, you are making that dessert by hand. Anything less would be unacceptable, you perfectionists out there. But in reality, you didn't need to put that big of an offer on the table. Because something that you make really well, better than anyone else, that absolutely everyone loves, is a mac and cheese. And you bring this mac and cheese to a lot of potlucks, and it is the first dish that gets demolished every single time. But in your head, this Thanksgiving dinner was really big. It was a big deal. And you figured, oh, well, you know what? It's a cheap dish. So if I bring it, I'm just being cheap, or it's not that special, it doesn't take me long to make, or I'm always bringing it, so it's not such a big deal. So you have undervalued your own asset, and people would have been happy to accept that as your offering. Instead, you gave away more than you should. Now, this habit of undervaluing or just ignoring assets tends to happen more often with accommodating type negotiators. Because again, we're so eager, we're so focused on the others that we don't realize how much we have to offer ourselves. Now, problem number 2 that people might run into is essentially the flip side of this one, where you consistently overestimate the value or the attractiveness of what it is you have to offer. There is a human tendency to assign more value to things that we ourselves like or need, or in particular, things that we have had a hand in creating or have put effort into. And there's this fantastic cognitive bias that has been dubbed the IKEA effect. This has been studied by a fair number of researchers and has been replicated in a number of studies, that when people go to resell their flat pack IKEA furniture, they typically overestimate the resale value of it on Marketplace or Kijiji or whatever, specifically if they were the ones who assembled it. If someone else assembled it, they don't overvalue it. But if they had put in the effort themselves, they charge much more than they should, more than other people are willing to pay. That's the IKEA effect. I also call this cognitive bias, my own term, the "but she runs great" bias, where you're trying to negotiate for a piece of equipment. You know the thing is held together with Bondo and duct tape, but the person selling it to you is pretty darn proud of this. And don't worry, she runs great. She'll run great for another 10 years. And they overvalue the actual worth of this thing that you're trying to negotiate over. This is typically more of a feature of adversarial type negotiators. You folks tend to have bags of confidence and apply that confidence to the value of the assets. And what happens is, just as the undervaluers will leave more on the table than they should, the overvaluers tend to get reactionary when it's rejected and then dig in even harder. They lock horns even more, and it amplifies that competitiveness. So needless to say, we want to be avoiding these two tendencies when we're in negotiations. And the best way to avoid these problems is with planning and preparation. I cannot tell you enough, by the way, how much of communication skill comes down to forethought, to planning, to preparation. Even if you only have a few seconds to do it, it makes a difference. Now, when it comes down to your assets, and this is going to be for the bigger negotiations that you're involved in, you want to take time to thoroughly catalog what you have to offer and then analyze the actual value of those things. It's going to start with some brainstorming. Think of every single tangible and intangible asset you can possibly bring to the table. Do not self-edit. The ones that will come to mind first are probably going to be the tangible assets, the obvious things like money and resources, but you need to go past that because you might be able to offer time, flexibility. Maybe you have knowledge or expertise or specific experience that those other people would really like to have access to. Maybe, depending on the negotiation, what you have to offer are connections, your personal or professional network that will help them get what they want. Maybe there's soft skills that are really important to them. The idea here is that you think creatively and you don't edit it down at the first pass. I always recommend setting it to the side and coming back to it later in case you think of more, but also so that you can look at your list with fresh eyes. When you look at your list again, you want to start actually evaluating, digging into the value of those assets from the other party's point of view. You must step into their shoes for this because it's not about what you think it's worth. It's about what they think it's worth. And you need to ask yourself at least the following 4 questions. These are my favorites. First up, ask yourself, can they get this thing from someone or somewhere else? Or is it really unique? Because if it's only you they can get it from, that drives up the value. What is the objective market value of this item? Do you need to do some research? Do you need to ask other people for their opinion? Do you need to go look up the Kelly Blue Book or something else to figure out what this thing is worth? Is this item a need to have or a nice to have? You know, does it fulfill a really big interest on their part or one of those smaller interests that would be just, just the cherry on top? And is this actually going to help them meaningfully meet their interests or their goals? These are the minimum 4 questions that I like to ask. You might have others, but it's important to sit down and actually evaluate these things objectively. And once more, that process of evaluation gets you to take a step back, look at the big picture, and helps you become calmer, more perceptive, more objective. And on top of that, when you know your assets well, you can be more strategic with them, which boosts your confidence. So let's go back to that piece of paper. And you are now going to, guess what? Brainstorm some assets. Don't worry about the other sides, only focus on yours. Think of as many as you can. I'm going to give you 20 seconds. Five seconds left, and then we'll take it to a poll to see how you did. Okay, time's up. Let's have a look at that poll. How many assets did you come up with? And again, there is no shame if you found it really difficult to think of some. Sometimes it's going to be very easy. Sometimes it's going to be really hard, especially if you feel like you don't have much to bring on the table. And whenever we've got some results up there, Caitlin, let us know what people are saying. More accurately, let me know what people are saying.
Absolutely. So right now we are at 75% between 3 and 5, and about 15% 6+. So that's great.
Marvelous. I'm glad to hear it. See, it's coming to mind quicker and quicker. The more thinking you do, the easier it is to come up with these longer lists. And I find that looking into interests first, first doing that interests versus positions will help you think of more assets more quickly because you are now seeing more options of what you actually have to work with. So if you were preparing an actual negotiation, you wouldn't just stop at your assets. You would spend some time thinking, trying to anticipate what the other side might have to offer. Now, they're not going to tell you everything that they have to offer on the table, just as you don't need to tell them everything that you have. But you want to try to predict it a little bit and then figure out, how do you value those things? What's most attractive to you? What do you think the dollar worth is? So that you're prepared to deal with that when you come into the actual conversation. Now, this brings us to key number 3, which is strong negotiation mindset. You need to know your boundaries and your BATNAs, not your Batmans. That would be cool, but is a very different thing. Let's look at boundaries first. Farms need boundaries, they need fences, they need property lines, because that is what tells you what area you have to work with to produce whatever it is you're producing. The same thing goes for negotiations. You can't go into them willy-nilly without some kind of definition of a space in which you are going to negotiate. This is what helps you collaborate without giving in. Because we want to work with other people, but we don't want to be doormats for them either. We need to protect our own interests as well as help them get what they need. So your boundaries in negotiations are going to be defined by two things. Number one is your target value. Number two is the reservation value. And I know it's a little technical, but it's very worthwhile. Your target value is your aspirational goal. It is the agreement that you would agree to immediately if someone offered it. Hey, do you want XYZ? Oh, that is perfect. No negotiation needed. That's everything I could have hoped for. It is the best deal you can get. And it should be a reach for you. It needs to be realistic, but it should be something that you need to reach for a little bit in order to get. Now, you also need a reservation value, which is the worst deal or the worst agreement you would be willing to accept before walking away from the negotiation entirely. So this value, it should make you go, a little bit. It should make you clench your teeth, but it's just enough to make you say yes. And if one thing has changed, you're walking away. You need to have both of these very, very clearly defined. Excuse me for a moment. Goodness, it's dry down here. You need to have both of these very, very clearly defined because, again, that's what's going to show you what space you have in which you can willingly collaborate. Now, for my accommodating types, there's a couple things I want you to be aware of. Number one, you need to define your reservation value really clearly and firmly implant it in your brain, because that is the thing in which if people push you too much, you're going to likely cross that line that you drew in the sand and give in more than you should. But I also, for my accommodating types, want to encourage you to have an ambitious enough target value that it makes you a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, you want to reach, you need to be ambitious because you have to overcome that desire to come to an agreement quickly. For my adversarial types, what I want you to do is make sure that there is enough room in between your target and your reservation value, that there is space to collaborate, that there is space to look for new solutions to this problem. Because if the target and reservation value are too close together, then you risk throttling the negotiation and turning it less of a negotiation and more of just an argument. And you want to avoid that. So knowing your target and reservation value can help you figure out whether or not you have a good space within which to work with the other person. Figuring this out really helps both the accommodating and the adversarial types, and frankly, the collaborative types too. It helps us all avoid being less reactionary when things aren't going well. So we're less likely to panic, we're less likely to get angry. Whatever your reaction tends to be, it helps to keep a lid on that. So that is a really significant mindset effect, and it really increases your confidence, your resolve, and your flexibility. But what if you can't meet that reservation value? What if there is no agreement to be had, no matter what you do? This is where we come to the BATNAs. And a BATNA stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This is your plan B, your backup plan if everything falls apart and you have to walk away from the table. Having a good BATNA is going to give you a better negotiation position. It's going to give you more leverage and more confidence because it tells you what you're going to do if it doesn't work. For example, let's say you're buying a parcel of land. You have two options. You have to buy land. Not purchasing is not an option, but you have a couple of choices. One choice is fabulous. It is everything you could have possibly asked for in this piece of land. It's going to help you do what you want to do and then some, but it is really expensive. It is definitely overpriced and away from your budget, and the sellers have some unfortunate conditions that you really don't like placed upon this sale. Now, if you knew that your option was right across the road, pretty much the same location, and the piece of land wasn't as good, didn't have everything that you wanted, but it was pretty close, right? It's good enough, it'll serve you very well, and you could be comfortable with that, and it's priced right. And it doesn't have any ridiculous conditions. If you had that as your plan B, as your BATNA, then you're in a very strong negotiating position because you are less likely to get pushed around or bullied or just sucked into a bad deal with the really nice but overpriced piece of land, because your alternative is very attractive. On the other hand, if your alternative, the second piece of land, is that fetid bog that is 20 kilometers down an unserviced road, the land is wretched, it's not as much as you need, it's not going to do what you want, and it's overpriced, that is a terrible alternative. But if that's your only other choice, if that's your backup plan, you are going to be much more likely to overspend or accept a bad agreement on the first piece of really nice property because your BATNA is unattractive. So you have less bargaining power here. It is generally considered in negotiations that they who have the best BATNA has the most leverage because they can walk away first. So you really want to know what this is for you in advance, particularly in high stakes negotiations. Now, what makes a good BATNA? It has to be clearly defined, clearly described. You need to know exactly what it looks like. It can't be vague. And it needs to be realistic and actionable, to the point that I say when you write down a few action steps that will help you enact that plan B if you need to. Because when you have all of that tucked away, ready to go, it calms down your brain again. It helps you settle into the negotiation. It helps you avoid panicking. Now, I'm just keeping an eye on the time. I want to make sure we've got lots of time for questions. So I'm not going to get you right now to brainstorm these, but when we close this down, I strongly recommend that right away you write down, you figure out for this negotiation, what is your target value, what is your reservation value, and what is your BATNA? And if it takes you some time to think of those, if it takes you, especially with the BATNA, some time to figure out, okay, is it realistic? Is it clearly defined? Do I know how I'm going to act on this? That's okay. This is stuff that you really make the most of when you think through it closely. All of these things together, knowing your interests and positions, knowing your assets, having your boundaries and BATNAs defined, these strategies help you develop a really strong, secure mindset for your negotiations. And they make you aware of just how many possibilities usually do exist to solve this problem that you and the other party both share. It opens you up to possibilities. It gives you perspective. It boosts the collaboration. And these are things that I know that you, being women in the agricultural sector, know and need in your work. Because again, you're in a highly intensive industry. There's a lot of testosterone flowing around very often. You really need to know how to stick to your guns while maintaining solid relationships with the vendors or suppliers or business people around you. And these strategies will help you do just that. And a great thing about them is that when you get good at negotiating, everything we've discussed today will help you improve your communication skills in other areas as well. So it has this wonderful communication knock-on effect. And it's going to help you come to better deals, whether what you are negotiating is as complicated as a land sale or as simple as getting your kid to eat their flippin' broccoli. So with that, I hope that you dig into these strategies, that you put them into use in your own life. Here's how you get the handouts. Head over to laurensergy.kit.com/FCC. It'll be put into chat, and this website will also be sent out in the follow-up emails. And then just put in name, email address, and I will send you the handouts. And if you ever want to get a hold of me, or if you'd like to get more resources, I've got a ton of them on my website and YouTube channel. And you can always email me at laurensergy@laurensergy.com. I love questions and I am very responsive, so don't be shy. And with that, Caitlin, how about if we open up the floor to some Q&A?
I think the most important question that I have for you, especially for parents watching with young children, did Nico ever eat the broccoli, or does he eat broccoli now?
He eats it now. He loves it. That broccoli battle was nightly for about 4 months. And I think I think it was because he was like, I wonder what I can get mom to do tonight.
Fair, fair. Good for him. He must have learned it from you, the expert of negotiation.
He is my child.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, a couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
How can you tell if you're being adversarial when negotiating?
I often work off of how fixated you are on your position on defending your territory. If you are really fixated on it and like, no, I'm not going to give any ground, that's a pretty good sign that you might be adversarial. The other thing you can do is pay attention to how the other person is responding. If they seem to be getting angrier than you think they should, then they might be picking something off of you, off of your behavior that indicates that there's some horn locking. I also go off of your own body signals. Is your heart hammering? That can often be a sign. Do you feel a lot of muscle tension coming up? That can often be a sign that you're getting into that locked horns position. And frankly, ask other people. Because very often we're really poor judges of our own behavior because we're not observing it. We're inside our own heads. And if you have someone you can trust who will tell you honestly, ask them straight up and don't take their answer personally. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It probably just means that you're naturally competitive and this brings it out in you.
Absolutely. To add on to that question, how can you work on shifting to a collaborative approach?
The big shift is to always go back to the interests. Always go, why do we want what we want? And then think, ooh, is there something new we can do? So I adopt an almost overly excited thought of, oh, goody, here's something where we can be really creative. Is there something else we can do? Is there something new? Is there something different? What's the full range of needs and motivations that we're working with? And then you absolutely ignore those original positions. Take them off the table. They don't exist. You're making something new. That helps you open up to more opportunity, because usually the thing that shuts down collaboration is that hyperfixation on what you originally asked for.
Very good. This is a good question that came in. It says, I really appreciate having a roadmap to preparing for a negotiation. Do you have any advice on how initiating the negotiation conversation with a collaborative tone? So you had mentioned the excitement of it. I'm curious, is there a curiosity piece that comes with it in the collaborative tone?
There's definitely a curiosity piece, and you might need to be curious for both parties, because you can't always guarantee that the other party's going to jump in or know that this is what they should do as well. So if you can express curiosity, I'm curious about where you're coming from. Can you tell me why this is so important to you? Can you tell me what else might have led you to take this position? You keep asking that why question and draw them into the conversation. People love talking about themselves. So a way that you can shift over to a more curious tone is to ask the other person lots of questions. Now they're thinking, now they're interested, now they're exploring, now they're getting curious as well. But it's more palatable because they're speaking about themselves while they're doing it. And you can dribble in a little bit of your own interests and your own motivations in there. So you sometimes need to lead the way in shifting the tone, but that's really where you go with it. How curious can you be?
Love that. Another great question that I think probably many of us, including myself, can struggle with. How do you suggest we remove our personal emotions out of a negotiation, specifically a work one?
Never tell people that they are being emotional, and never tell people that they need to stop being emotional. That is waving the red flag in front of the bull right off the bat, because what's their response going to be? No, I'm not, you are. Right? Like that's going to be the response. It also comes across as extremely patronizing, extremely demeaning. If that, I would say, is a classic adversarial tactic. actually, depending on the sort of person. Don't be so emotional. We shouldn't bring our emotions into it. One thing I often teach in my other workshops is that emotions are the first filter through which we process and understand information. So you can't take them out of the picture because they're a fundamental element of how we understand what to think and why to think a certain way about different things. No one is a blank slate. But in terms of calming down the emotions, one thing you can do is, first up, make sure that you are showing calmness yourself, not frostiness, not a complete lack of emotion, but that you're calm. Your tone is modulated, you speak in an even cadence, possibly even slow down your rate of speech a little bit, because that helps to decrease tension quite a bit. Then get the other person talking. You'll see that there's a lot of element of getting them to talk and then showing that you're listening here, because it helps them get on your side. When the other person has the space to do a lot of talking, it helps them vent the emotion out. It gives the energy somewhere to go, and that can help dissipate it quite a bit. So basically, you make space for the emotion, but then allow it to dissipate and return to the conversation at hand. Using very neutral language helps, and in particular, I recommend avoiding using personal pronouns. So you, me, they, we. Talk about the problem. What else is informing this? Could this thing work? Might this be, or might it be, a better solution? Because what that does is it helps people get distance away from the source of conflict. It basically lets you personally disassociate from the source of conflict, and that brings the emotion down as well. So don't tell them they can't be emotional. It'll have the opposite effect. Instead, work your language so that the language is unemotional, and give those feelings space to flow and then space to be released.
So good. So good.
It's a lot of juggling. Like, I get that it's a lot of juggling. Easier said than done.
Such good advice going into, let's say, the holiday season around the family dinner table. And especially, we don't suggest you talk about hard things during those fun times, but, you know, thinking about those things in the back of your head.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right.
Getting rid of the word you is magical.
Absolutely.
Don't replace it with we, by the way, because we all know that when we say we mean you. But getting rid of that word, like, that's one way that you can have the tough Christmas you can talk. Oh, no, you can't talk politics at Christmas. I retract
Not
that.
recommended.
But you can still have a harder conversation if you don't say the word you.
Absolutely. Another question here. What do you do if the other person is refusing to collaborate?
You know that reservation value and the BATNA? That's why. Because you can't make them collaborate. And if the other person is simply refusing to get on board with any of this, and no amount of easing them over, of introducing the new ideas, of looking at the interests is going to make them budge, and they cannot meet your reservation value, you walk away. You enact the BATNA.
Well, that's why it's so important to have that BATNA, right? To have that piece, to know that either way, it's going to work out the way that you need it to.
Might not be what you want, but it's a backup.
Yes, absolutely. Lauren, we have about a minute left. Do you have any books or resources that you would recommend for folks?
I'm just looking to see if I have it with me, and I don't, because I was using it the other day, and so I moved it from my book pile over there. My favorite book is called Getting to Yes. It is written by William Ury and Robert Fisher. I think it's in like its 13th edition right now. It's a slim little volume. It's not long at all. It is information dense, though. That is the single best book on principled collaborative negotiation you will ever come across. And it is also one of the best overall communication skills books that I can possibly recommend. Getting to Yes. Crucial Conversations is another really good one. And another good one, and it's a fun read, is called Thank You for Arguing by Jay Heinrichs.
I have my list going here.
I know, I give you a whole bunch there.
Right. No, it's so good. Lauren, thank you so much for all of this information and this wisdom today. It has been so good connecting with you again, and thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Anytime.
I hope you were able to take away all of this actionable insights that will give you confidence when you are communicating with others. I have my list of books going. I have my negotiation list here, and I am ready to negotiate, and I hope you are too. You will be receiving a link to the recording today in a few days, along with the links that Lauren had mentioned in her presentation. You are going to receive an email shortly in your inbox with an evaluation. Please fill out the evaluation, as FCC truly values your feedback and it helps them plan future events. And on behalf of FCC, thank you so much for joining us here today. We hope you got so much from it. And I have to put this personal note in here. Go Blue Jays, go. Have a great day, friends.